It is so lovely to look out and see Bob and Renata Wagner. Hello, welcome. We're so glad you're back with us for a little bit. You know, we have a saying in our line of work, sometimes the Spirit shows up, right? We're assigned texts, and today's assigned text is about a wedding. And just yesterday, our Associate Minister of Digital Strategy and Online Engagement, Jim Keat, got married. Congratulations, Jim and Chelsea. There are so many uncertainties in life, so very little that you and I can know for sure. There is one thing, however, that I am convinced is a universal truth of human life. Weird stuff happens at weddings. Because of my profession, I have perhaps attended more weddings than the average person and been in the know on a lot of behind-the-scenes situations. My experience includes, but is not limited to, too much hairspray causing a bridesmaid's hair to catch on fire as she walks past a candle, the cake collapsing at the reception, the unity candle refusing to light. Try finding words to make that turn of events seem meaningful. One particularly memorable wedding I performed was scheduled for 6 p.m. at one Saturday evening. The church I served then did not have an organist. Instead, we employed several students from area universities who rotated playing the organ. So our music director had arranged for one of them, a talented young man of 19, to play for the wedding that night. Matt was a great guy and a great musician. But did I mention that he was 19? The church was open and ready to go at 5 o'clock. At 5:15, I started looking for Matt, as he and I had never done a wedding together before, and there were certainly a few details we should work out. By 5:30, I was getting a bit concerned, but the bride and groom did not seem to notice that the musician wasn't there yet, and at 5:45, when the pre-wedding music was supposed to start, Matt wasn't there, and I started to panic. Like, panic. In general, I'm pretty good on my feet. After all, I did manage to make meaning out of an unlit unity candle. However, in that situation, I was coming up seriously empty. I mean, what was I going to do? Hum Pachelbel's canon? I ran down the hall to where our Burmese congregation was gathered for a meeting, and I pulled their pastor aside to ask if anyone in their group could play anything. And there was, in fact, one nice woman who said she could pick out Here Comes the Bride with one hand on the piano if I got very desperate. By then it was 5:55, and I was well beyond panic. As I rushed into the hallway to go back to the sanctuary and tell the bride and groom the situation, the elevator doors opened and out stepped Matt. Pastor Amy, sorry I'm a little late. The metro was running slow tonight. I can't remember exactly what I did, but I'm pretty sure it involved dragging poor Matt down the hallway by his collar. Weird things happen at weddings, and you don't even have to be a minister to know that. Today's gospel lesson is a perfect example. In this one, Jesus is telling another story to his disciples about the kingdom of heaven, which Jesus was always and forever doing, trying to paint for his disciples a vivid picture of God's best dreams for our world, a world filled with justice and mercy and love. And this time around, Jesus compared the kingdom of heaven to a wedding banquet. So here's how the story went. There was this king whose son, the prince, was getting married. The king was so happy about the occasion that he decided to throw a huge party in honor of his son, something that many parents do on such an occasion. He had his staff prepare everything, made a huge dinner, and roasted the finest cuts of meat. He got the place cards ready and started the chocolate fountain. And then he had his servants go to the homes of all the most important people and invite them to the party. Well, do you know that they were too busy to come? They were too busy to stop their day and brush their hair and shine their shoes and go to the king's party. The king was enraged, as you might be if you had paid for all those folks to come to a fancy banquet like this. I recently discovered that the average price per attendee at a wedding reception, that is a sit-down meal with an open bar, is between $100 and $200. Leading me to believe that my children will be celebrating their weddings with a potluck in South Hall. I'm not sure how much the king spent, but the text says he was so mad that he killed the folks who did not bother to attend, which, outrageous costs aside, is not something I would generally recommend. But the party was all ready. And the bride and groom were happy, and the king needed guests to attend. So he sent his servants out into the streets to invite anyone they could find. The text says the good and the bad. So that by the time that the king arrived in the banquet hall, it was filled with guests, ready to celebrate his son's great occasion. Well, the story ends right there in the Gospel of Luke. And it is such a nice story about those who are self-righteous, too arrogant to respond to God's invitation, and God going out into the streets to invite whoever wants to come to the prince's wedding reception of all things. We preachers love Luke's version because we can wax eloquent about radical inclusion, about God's great love for the whole world. But today we're reading the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew will not let us stop with a nice little message like that. His story goes a little further. Matthew wants to remind us that when Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, about bringing justice and mercy to life in the world, that painful transformation begins not with the world around us, but with the hearts within us. The political situation in which people were reading Matthew's memoir, both within the church and within the society around it, might have led Jesus' listeners to feel, well, a little bit self-righteous when they read the first part of this wedding story. The people reading Matthew had lived through the Roman army marching into Jerusalem sometime between 66 and 70 AD, taking over the whole city and burning it to the ground. They read this parable of Jesus about 80 AD, and the picture of an angry king destroying those who would not respond to his invitation was illustrated in their minds by that horrible experience. It might have been tempting for them to feel just a little bit smug as they heard this parable of Jesus and quickly found their place in the story. The ones who accepted the king's invitation, of course. And 2,000 years later, it might be tempting for us to feel just a little smug as well. We must be the outsiders that God has invited to the party in the end, right? Well, you know what I always say. If you read a parable about Jesus and feel happy and satisfied, you probably read it wrong. Matthew and Jesus were not about to let the first Christians get too smug, and they're not about to let us do it either. It's true. If those first listeners, or you or I, suspect that the loose ends of this nice little story are tied up a little too neatly, we would be correct. To find the weird thing that happened at this wedding We just have to go back to the text and read the very end of Matthew's story, where we hear that after all the poor people from the streets are invited in, the good and the bad, the ugly, all celebrating the king's son's wedding, the king himself arrives. And the hall was packed with guests, just as the king had hoped. Those who had snubbed his first invitation had been taught a lesson once and for all. His son was married. The food in the kitchen was plated. The wedding band was playing Kool and the Gang. The MC was announcing the guests. It was time to have a party. But look what Matthew says next. This little coda that Luke conveniently left off. The king comes to the party, sees that one of his newly invited guests has arrived at the party, not dressed appropriately, and the king gets mad. Like really, really mad. So mad that he tells his servants to take this guest too, bind him hand and foot, throw him into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It sounds to me like the king needs some anger management courses, but you and I are used to leaders like that. What is going on here, we might ask? That doesn't seem very nice or gracious or hospitable. What if the guy didn't have a fancy wedding robe to wear? What if he was too poor to dress up? Weird things always happen at weddings. Remember, follow the story as we have up until now. God makes a place at the party for all of us. According to Matthew's allegory, unlikely though it may seem, we got an invitation to the party after all. But here's the thing. Some of us choose to treat the grand invitation of the king as just another occasion. Can you believe it? We forget altogether that this is an invitation unlike any other, that we should treat this invitation with the highest care and the most meticulous attention. The king has invited us to dinner. People even like you and me are invited to the party that Jesus has described as the kingdom of heaven. Are we really going to show up as an afterthought, adding the appointment to our Outlook calendars just like any other appointment in a whole week of busyness? Are we going to come to this party resentfully, grudgingly, unprepared, gossip-filled, destructive? When we have been invited by the King of the universe to be just a little part of the kingdom of heaven coming to be right here and now. No way. No way. It doesn't matter who we are or what we have, there is no way we would dare show up at the party of the king wearing something like meaningless platitudes, or unsubstantiated values, or undemonstrated priorities. No way. Don't have a wedding robe as nice as the guy sitting next to you? It doesn't matter. Because the God who is bringing about a new way of living in this world is not concerned with what we wear, really. But be very assured that God is paying close attention to how it is our hearts are adorned when we show up to do God's work in the world. You and I, we've been invited to be part of the kingdom of heaven, God's hope coming to life on this earth. Given the incredible invitation, there's no way any of us would want to crash this wedding to show up underdressed. You know what I mean? The right thing to wear to a party like this would be something like full commitment, or generous giving, or how about a sacrificial offering of our time? This is a big party. The kingdom of heaven is coming to be, and there is no room for a lukewarm response. My dear friend Jim Somerville is the senior minister at First Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. He told me a story once about something that happened to him early in his time as pastor there. To get to know the congregation, he was spending a lot of weekend evenings having dinner at the homes of different members. One night, Jim and his friend Christy went to dinner at the home of a family who had 3 daughters, 8, 10, and 12. Apparently, these girls were very involved in the county fair, which happens around this time of year in Richmond. They worked hard to bake pies and make jelly and grow vegetables that they then took down to the county fair and entered in as many competitions as they could just to see how many ribbons they could bring home. Well, it happened that night that the Reverend Dr. and Mrs. Somerville were coming to dinner, the same night that the squash they entered in the county fair competition had been judged. And these girls, after researching how squash grows best, tending the vines carefully, thoughtfully selecting the biggest and most unblemished, shining squash, they won Best in Show. A blue ribbon for the big yellow squash they had tended for weeks in the garden right outside their window. As they gathered around the table to start their dinner, Jim and Christy noticed this big blue ribbon in the middle of the table, and it said, "First place." Having children themselves, Jim and Christy made sure to ask about the ribbon, and they learned all about the county fair. All of this conversation, of course, took place before dinner. But pretty soon it was time for dinner to be served. And the girls helped bring out the first course for dinner, which was squash soup. Made with Richmond County Fair's first place blue ribbon winning squash, no longer on display at the fair, but right at home in the kitchen, part of the meal that the family had prepared together for someone they knew was very important to them. Someone so special they wanted to show their appreciation by offering the very best they had, their blue ribbon squash. I'm telling you, friends, weird things always happen at weddings. Always. And this parable of Matthew's is no exception. This story is not really about welcoming strangers to the party or to the church, although that is a very good idea. This story is about how you and I show up for the work of God in the world. This is a story about the so many times that I have shown up for the building of the kingdom unprepared, uninvolved, uncommitted, an uninvested observer. What you and I have a hard time remembering is that it is the God of the universe who invites us, even us, to participate in bringing healing and hope, renewal and promise to this broken and pain-filled world in which we live. How should we respond to the God who calls us to do justice and love mercy? Should we show up as an afterthought, feeling noble because we would even deem to add to the work of our church to our schedules or our budgets? Or what would happen if we gathered together the very best of everything we have, the blue ribbons of our lives, and bring them here to the altar of Christ, grateful beyond belief that God would even come to sit at the table with us and delight in what we bring to the party. Today we welcome new members to our community. What a gift you are. What a gift. As we witness their commitment today, we should also be asking ourselves whether we show up here crashing the party or whether we're taking the work of God in this place seriously enough. Why on earth would we ever show up at a kingdom of heaven party wearing less than our best? God deserves so much more than that. So much more. So friends, it's time. It's time for you and for me to get ready for whatever God is inviting us to become. Ready. So that when the invitation finally comes our way, well, we'll be sure we know exactly how it is we show up best for the part we will play in the great party of the kingdom of heaven. Don't you even think about crashing this party. Because showing up with anything less than your very best is just not